closely. Our department goal is that we will all use technology as part of bell ringers to increase engagement, differentiate instruction, and/or to augment preparation for mandated assessments on a daily basis. And that's the one that we've really focused on as we round robin and talk about what we're doing in our classrooms. But don't forget our course goals, which are the overarching one is that 75% of our students will achieve growth targets department-wide, in particular on the end of course exam, and that's what we're working toward. I don't know exactly where we are here, so I'm just going to start with Ratasha, if you're okay, Ratasha.
Yeah.
What are you doing in your class? What have you done in the past week to ensure that we're hitting those goals?
Okay, like every day, I always do my bell ringers on Google Classroom, project it up on the smart board, so even if students don't have their Chromebook for the day, they have the option, they have to do the bell ringer, so they can write it on, notebook paper, take it down, and then upload it to the Google Classroom later on when they have access. Or I stick them on the other computers so that students are all working together and use proximity while they're working to address learning gaps and build relationships with students, see what they know, what they don't know, pick out a few students, say, hey, you know this, and encourage others who are struggling. This week I really emphasize what Jeff was talking about with the verbiage for the state's assessments. I hit on especially, explain and list and what is the difference. Even though we're going over this, every day, and you're probably sick of me telling you, you're still not getting it. And I promise my mic is on. So, explaining to them the difference between what to mean when I ask for explain and putting it in parentheses at the end of the prompt. This is what I want you to do. And, or list, give me bullet points. I don't want a paragraph. Explain it between list and explain. So just emphasizing that point. And I told students today specifically, I said, you will be taking the state assessment in a month. 1 month from yesterday. So, and white ghost. They were horrified. So I think that's really hitting home with them now that they need to pay more attention to what's going on and what the question's asking. And so we went over that a lot today because it was review for what did we learn in this unit with research papers. Well, addressing the prompt is the first thing we do. But I've been using clips from Friends and How I Met Your Mother to supplement my instruction, clips from movies. For formulating good research questions, I showed students a Diane Sawyer interview with Taylor Swift. And I said, what is a Diane Sawyer's great interviewer? What does she do well that you can use in your research papers? Right? And they all got ask open-ended questions. So they seemed to really they really liked it. It was something that, and I picked someone that they knew. I didn't pick Aretha Franklin.
All right, thank you. Deanna.
My bell ringers are also on the smart board through a PowerPoint. The last couple of weeks, I've been trying to change with the bell ringers to be those verbs and listing and explain. This week, we've been working on the thesis statement with our research paper and really giving a lot of examples of thesis statements, having them practice and look at appropriate thesis statements and inappropriate thesis statements. And that's where we've been at.
Awesome. Chris.
I also use the Smartboard and Chromebooks for bell work. This week I concentrated on using the Chromebooks for differentiation of instruction in the sense of I have a really big class. First period, it takes me forever to get around and have a dialogue with each student about their bell work answers, but I think I value that. I think that's really helping the ones who come to school. And it was noted that there was downtime through observation. And I'm like, well, yeah, that is a problem. So I started using Blackboard resources, showing them where it is. Take a look at this PowerPoint or try this Quizlet while I'm circulating, work on this. And give them a couple options. And that has gone over very well with that group. And I think it is helping just from the repetition. So I just didn't think of it before. I mean, everything was there, it didn't hit me like, hello.
Yeah, they can look at that on their own.
And they can
that's
pick
great.
what they think, or like in the Quizlet where they might have weaknesses or they can play the game. So that has been a very positive response from that group just over the last week.
I'm really glad you shared that, not to cut you off, but Jessica and I, we've done a research unit. She has led a research unit the past 2 weeks in this class. And we all know during those independent writing units, you give students a lot of free time. Some are more ahead and some are further behind, and they all require your attention at all times. So when there are hands up all around the room and you're on one side of the room addressing concerns, how do you keep students on the other side of the room working when they need your presence there? And I think that it's great that you shared that practice to assist with that. That's something we've talked about a lot in the last few days.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Because I sort of, with that free rice, as I'm going around, and I have been telling them to go to a higher level every day than where they have been. And because again, with these thesis statements, trying to go around and check those out, oh my golly, so I did.
I like that free rice thing too. I haven't sprung that one on yet.
Oh,
Because that was after I had this other idea and I thought, well, let's go with this for a while, but I do like that as a resource.
Well, I realized how, again, going
Yeah.
proximity, that with the research, that was taking me quite a bit of time with individuals, so sorry, Chris.
No, that's okay. I make tiny notes because I always forget this part. Well, I get in here, I'm like, oh. This week I also, well, even before this, because Mr. Fisher brought it to my attention since I teach ACT prep, like the whole verbiage thing. Okay. So I have been already, like I was already aware and had been trying to work some of that in, but the handout we got was very helpful on giving me, like, expanding my repertoire. But I have been hitting that at least a couple times a week with all different classes on bell work tasks and talking about, like, well, you forgot to do this part, or you only get half credit because you answered this, or you didn't give me sentences, or you gave me a list when I asked for sentences, or sentences when I asked for a list, or whatever it is. And they're sort of annoyed at first, and then I'm like, this is what happens on tests. I can write the questions. I just copy them off the test. And write them. So it is very effective.
Good. Jessica, we're going to skip you because you're going to hit it during your presentation. Dr. Lawson?
Well, I used my whiteboard and my Chromebooks for bell work, and this time we were spending time talking about the difference between romanticism and transcendentalism, and they had to explain what that was. And we also spent some time talking about the prime movers of those two movements, where they originated, and of course we spent a lot of time talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and then I would move from that to the utilization of the whiteboard, where I would pull up various aspects of nature, whether it dealt with beauty or some other part, and then we would just discuss that. And I spent some time talking about it enough where maybe I could give them a quote from Thoreau, like, if you advance confidently in the direction in your dreams and endeavor to live the life which you imagine, or whether it would be another quote from Emerson, which would be something to this effect: what I must do is all that concerns me, not what people think. Then they would have to differentiate, and and try to figure out who said what. And that's how we handled it.
Nice. Jeff?
Still using the PowerPoint to display the bell ringer and the Chromebooks via Google Docs, sharing to have them submit those on a weekly basis. Working on romanticism this week, moving them on from transcendentalism, which we covered last week, and attempting to work into my bell ringers more of that visual cueing that Jeff's been talking about. You know, what do I want? So I do a combination. I use the verbiage, you know, explain, describe, but I also make sure to tell them with the prompt 2 to 3 sentences or list or 1 paragraph, so that they know how much writing I'm expecting for each statement, which has been interesting because that has allowed me to pick out their learning gaps more.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end, when we begin talking about the bell ringer, I can say, now, I'm seeing right answers, and that's a good thing, but I'm seeing some real learning gaps in how to read a prompt, which is really important because on last week's assessment, I asked for a 3-paragraph response, and several of them gave me 1 because they didn't read the prompt. So that's a learning gap that we're trying to close, which really has nothing to do with our essential questions or big ideas, but it is a learning gap that they all have and they all need to have addressed before they get out of here.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how I'm using it right now, is to really focus on how to respond, because they can respond at this point. They know the routine, and they kind of know what I'm looking for. You know, after I've taught it a couple of days, they're like, okay, I know this is a key tenet, this is an important part of this concept. The concepts don't worry me with these kids anymore. It's, can you respond appropriately?
Right. Okay. Thank you. All right, in my classroom, more of the same. Students created a Google Doc at the beginning of the year. They shared it. They have all of their bell ringers on that document. I use the smartboard every single day. I'll add this in later, I guess. This week, like many of you, with the air assessments coming up for my lab students, since that's the only class I'm teaching right now, I have a lot of sophomores in that class. Out of my 19 students in there, I'd say 10 or 11 are sophomores. I have a freshman in there. They're 3 weeks from taking their air assessment. And I actually think they are more terrified than I am at this point, which is saying something. We focused this week, like many of you did, on the how, not the what. So to display for you a bell ringer that I gave my students on Monday, it was 2 questions. And the first question was, summarize the 3 types of pre-writing you learned about on Monday. And I'm continuing to put the number of points in parentheses, the way the OGT did, but also to kind of give my students the specificity that they need in terms of, it's worth 3 points, you need to give me 3 points worth of information. I got to tell you, this week, as I walked around the room, and Jessica can vouch for this, you know, 75%, 80% of my students just listed the 3 types of pre-writing. And we talked about how, look, you've got the content, you have it. You gave me 3. Bree Denowitz said, I gave you 3, you asked for 3. Right, Bree. I gave you types of pre-writing. Right, Bree. But I didn't ask you to list. I asked you to summarize. And you know, we talked about how if you just list them, that's a 0 on this end of course assessment that you have to pass. And we talked about how a summary uses complete sentences and hits the key points. And we talked about what that verb means. And then within lists, we talked about how bullet points will suffice. So today, I switched up the verbs. And I threw them a curveball. I gave them list and describe. So, you know, 90% of the students listed, but they did not describe. And, you know, what I do is I go around the room and we talk about what the answer should look like. And then I already have my answers written up here. So I can exhibit for them, once we're done talking about what it should look like, what I have, and then I expect them to get that down if they don't have anything like that. So we did list and describe today, and since it was Friday, I went all out. We also did analyze, which is very, very, very difficult for that class. And, you know, Adri Childers, you know, I've got down that free writing is my favorite type of pre-writing. I answered that. So she had this first sentence. She identified, and we talked about how in this question, the first thing you have to do is identify what your favorite type of pre-writing is, but then you need to analyze how effective it is. Okay, talking about strengths and weaknesses. And, you know, we went through and we talked about each type of pre-writing that Ms. DeLong taught in my absence on Tuesday and the strengths and weaknesses of each and how you would answer that particular question. In terms of the course goal, we are in test mode right now. And we're in a weird position in this class because all the sophomores in here, I know their park results and I can't publish them to them. But almost all of them are ones. And I don't know exactly what or how much you know about our new generation assessments, but you have to get a 4 in the subcategory of English in order to graduate, which means that they have to put up a 3 on the English 2 exam, or they're going to be retaking English 1 or English 2, or both English 1 and 2. And the focus for these students, they're not writers. And we know on the AIR assessment there's going to be expository writing, there's going to be argumentative writing, so we have hammered the writing process, starting with reading and understanding the question, and that one we hit every day with these verbs here. You've got to understand what the verb's asking you to do, and for now I'm italicizing it. I told them in a week or so the italicization's gone away, and you're going to have to read it closely on your own and see what it's asking. We're through pre-writing, we're through thesis statements, and I told them every 2 weeks, but it's going to have to be every week. They're going to write an essay. And that class, you know, we're working on, okay, your thesis statement, have to have one in an argumentative or expository piece of writing. Has to be last sentence of your introduction, and we've got to have that organizational component. And if they don't write on this AIR assessment, they're not going to pass it. It's impossible to pass without writing. That's such a huge component of the assessment itself. So, you know, just getting these students to write 5 paragraphs, you know, today I did an easy one. What is the best holiday and why? Just to get the organizational pattern and framework down. And then from there, we're going to go harder. We've talked about some other issues. I have past OGT prompts at my disposal. And if need be, I have some park ones from last year to build them up so that they don't just break down in a testing situation, because that's what happens with these kids. They see rigor, they run away, they quit, and they can't do that and hope to be successful. So that's what we're doing in my class and the lab class in terms of department and course goals. I do want to say I haven't had the opportunity to observe anybody this week. Jeff, I need to get in and observe you. Chris, I need to observe you. Bertasha, I need to observe you 1,000 times. You know, I think everybody's doing a great job on their bell ringers in terms of incorporating technology. And that, as our department goal, I feel really great when Jeff asked me, how's it going in terms of hitting that goal, that we're doing our job every day. The course goals, that's a work in progress. And it's a work in progress not just with our courses, but with all content areas all the way across the state with these new assessments. So we're getting there. And it's these presentations that help us to identify exactly what we need to do in order to improve our students' ability to pass those assessments. So at this time, Jessica, are you ready to present?
Sure.
Okay. It's all you.
I'm going to do this a little bit differently than everyone else has done so far, because I'm a visual person, so I gave everybody a packet, and we're going to kind of work through the materials in the packet. So I wanted to start with my second unit, and we're going to go through all 3 of my classes with the second unit, and then move on to unit 3. I don't feel like I can explain and justify why my students scored the way they did if we don't look at the assessment itself. So, Jeff, you want to go ahead and just read the first question there on task 1 of the summative?
Okay. Read the following prompt and complete the chart. Due to budget cuts, the administration is considering eliminating all athletic programs in your school. How do you feel about this proposal? State your position and persuade your reader to see your point of view. Be specific in your argument.
Okay, so obviously Unit 2 is the argumentative writing unit. And 12 points of the exam, which is 40% of the exam, was to complete the chart. And many of my students did not understand that each box is worth a percentage of their grade, is about 3% of their grade. And some of them just left boxes blank. Either they just didn't value the chart and that it was worth something to them, or they ran out of time, whatever the issue may be. So that was one issue that we faced. And then the second 18 points, so the last 60% of the exam, was an essay that they had to compose in class, and that was where 60% of their grade came from. And I provided you with some sample responses just to kind of talk about how I graded each one and how these scores were determined. In terms of this specific class, this is my 4th and 5th period. They are a regular class, a general population, 19 students. I had 16 yeses, 3 nos. So this scored me a 4 on this. And in terms of my nos, my first one that I want to talk about is Justin Ewing. He is a student who I have an extremely hard time getting anything out of. He was suspended half of last week and half of this week, so just getting him here is an issue. During this unit, he was absent several days. On the test, he constantly needs encouragement, just to get anything out of him. You know, I have to constantly be on him. Justin, give me something. Write something down. I can't give you credit if you don't give me something. And so that's just a battle I face with him on a daily basis, and especially in a testing situation. When he's confronted with a test, a lot of times he shuts down. He doesn't, he just is overwhelmed by the content. And even though he has an opinion on this, he can verbally state his opinion on this particular prompt about budget cuts in sports. He has an opinion on it, but getting it on paper is extremely difficult to get anything out of him. So he did grow 42% from his pretest, which I consider a success for him. But in terms of the score, this is a no for him, even though he grew 42%. So then my next no is Justin Allen. He is another student. He's kind of a roller coaster student for me. Sometimes he's really, really good. He's really, really with it. Today was one of those days. He was on fire today. Other days, it seems like he's not there. And so with him, one of the things I struggle with is getting something out of him on paper. Again, if I call on him, he almost always has the right answer, especially in a bell ringer situation. He will type out the question and just sit there and wait for somebody to tell him the answer, even though he is cognitively able to deliver the answer if I were to ask him about it. So just constantly motivating him verbally. He again struggled to even put anything on this test that's shown with his 13. I think he only filled in 1 or 2 boxes on the front, left the rest blank, and I don't even think he gave me a paragraph. So that would be why 13 is there. Just in terms of getting anything out of the student, it's hard if he's having a bad day.
And yet he did well on the formatives.
Again, that's another indicator that the formatives aren't predictive of the summatives. The formatives ask about, in this unit, rhetorical devices, defining them. He can do that. He can define them. Also, we tend to go over the answers on a bell ringer that morning before we take the test, so we have an intensive review right before the test. So that's another reason that these aren't predictive of the summative, which we've talked about several times in our department meetings before. And Levi Hurley, what can I say about Levi? He is another roller coaster student. Sometimes he is with it, sometimes he's bouncing off the walls. He tends to be a distraction for other students. I've moved his seat. I've kept him in the same spot, but I've moved the other kids around him to put more focused students around him, hoping that they would, pull him up. He tends to talk to one other student, so I moved that student across the room to try to get some separation between them. It's definitely helped the other student. But Levi just continues to be distracted in class. He is often off topic. Again, he's one that I struggle to get anything out of. And he's just a trying student for me. I definitely am glad that he improved 37%. That's better than any growth less than that, but I would like to see more out of him. He's definitely capable, but in terms of a testing situation, he just does not, he's not usually as willing as other students to give me the effort or to put anything down on paper really at all. So that is kind of my worst class in terms of Unit 2. But if we hop on over to first period, which is an honors class, this group has 19 students, and I have all yeses on this. They all grew, they all passed. This is a really exceptional group of students. With it being first period, they're in the morning. They often are pretty quiet in class, just it's hard to jumpstart them and light a fire under them, but they're really good test takers, and that's seen in their score. They're excellent test takers. Once I kind of get them motivated in the morning to participate, they're a really good group, and I just have, this is just a great group of kids. They're strongly motivated, they're grade motivated, they want to do well on that testing situation. There's not a whole lot to say about this group, other than they're great. Then third period, I don't know if anybody remembers when Justin talked about this group when he presented, but they are just wonderful. There's 28 of them, and they are an incredible group. They always participate in class. They are extremely engaged all the time. They're a bit chatty at times, but they are just phenomenal. They're not as strong test takers, overall. This group got a 27 yeses, 1 no, so I think this is a 5 as well. Yeah, this is a 5 as well. My 1 no is a student, Darren Shoemaker. She, as far as I know, last year she was in all special classes with the intervention specialist. And she really struggles to form coherent thoughts and get them down on paper in any capacity. And I'm not sure that she meets the standard of an honor student, but I do think this is the least restrictive environment for her because they bring her up. And I think that this is really the best place for her to be. I don't think if she were in a regular class that she would have grown 38% like she did in this class. But because of the environment she's in, she grew 38%, which I think is a success for her on this unit. Also, some days she can't even remember my name. I'll greet her at the door and she says, "Good morning, miss," and then trails off because she can't remember my name. And that's just the kind of student that I'm dealing with in terms of Darren. I've worked one-on-one with her individually just to try to get more out of her, to meet her where she needs to be met. But again, I do think that this class is the best environment for this type of student. So that is third period on Unit 2. And then we've already done all of them. So moving on to Unit 3.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah,
Any questions about Unit 2?
the argumentative.
I have one.
What's that?
This chart is there for pre-writing purposes, is that correct?
Yes.
We
Yes.
give students this chart, this piece of paper, and it's on a sheet of paper. It's a piece of paper. It's not online, it's not on Blackboard like the rest of our assessment, to mimic the park last year and the air this year, where students are going to get scrap sheets of paper on which they are able to pre-write. They're not required. They're able to if they so choose. I think we have a lot of strong advocates in this department for the benefits of pre-writing. You know, when you generate and organize your ideas prior to writing, it impacts your writing in a positive way. I guess what I'm asking is does this chart matter? You know, you talked about how some students didn't see the importance of this chart. Should we take it out completely and just, I mean, it's not graded on the air. It's not graded on the park assessment. Should we remove it entirely and just give them an essay? It's an argumentative writing unit. Or should we actually grade their pre-writing, and if so, how do we justify that?
That's a very good question because we want them to pre-write, we want them to get into good habits. However, one of the habits that's been tested into them is that pre-writing in scratch paper does not count.
Yeah.
I think one of the things with this too is I saw a lot of students who at the last minute, the last 5-10 minutes of class, they were going back into their essays and where's my thesis? Okay, I'm going to write down my thesis that I already wrote, or I'm just going to take a couple quotes from my paper and throw into the supporting details section. And it wasn't used as a pre-writing tool at all. It was sort of an afterthought for them on a testing situation. Now, could that have been me not prompting them and saying, this is your pre-writing tool? Possibly. But there again, I mean, they're not conditioned to have pre-writing graded. And a lot of my students, the ones who scored higher on this, flipped it over and did their own pre-writing on the back.
Yeah.
That was more valuable to them than this chart was.
So my question is, do we grade pre-writing? I strongly believe you have to grade pre-writing if you want students to do it.
Right.
Otherwise, they don't see the value in it. I think it's important.
I do make mine do pre-writing, and I do grade them on it. I don't usually make it part of the assessment, however, because it is pre-writing, and mostly because on assessments like OGT and or OEA, or whatever it's called.
Anything, ACT,
Yeah,
AP
anything.
tests, anything.
Because it's not held against them on any of those tests, and that's what they pay attention to and what they value.
I think in an honors situation, you can always present it like it's
Yeah.
been proven that students who pre-write score better. And I think that would be enough justification for that group.
For that group,
But I
sure.
don't know about
Yeah, the general
regular-
group, it's
they
a
wouldn't
harder
care.
sell.
Yeah.
It's a much harder
Right.
sell. Because that's true also on the assessments that Ms. Baird and I used last year with the seniors, as well as a similar assessment that I gave in the same argumentative writing unit for Unit 3. That my honors kids really valued that and took the time to do it because you tell honors kids to jump through a hoop, they'll ask you how high.
Right.
But the general kids, they didn't see the value and didn't want to do it because a lot of them have different processes than writing it down. I mean,
Sure.
like, I talk to them, I know they're doing pre-work, it's
Mhm.
just not necessarily writing. So I don't know what to tell you.
And I think pre-writing is such an individualized task.
It
Some students prefer pre-writing
Exactly.
versus outlining or clustering or whatever it may be. And to put boxes around it and say, this is your pre-writing, and this is what you're assessed on. That,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of unfair in a way.
Yeah, I
Because they all
agree.
have different styles.
Right.
I agree entirely, but in terms of quantifying, that made it easier. You know,
Right.
you have 12 boxes for 12 points.
Right.
That said, I agree with you. Pre-writing has two purposes: generate, organize. You generate, that leads to more development. That's
Sure.
part of the rubric.
Right.
If you organize, it's more organized. That's part of the rubric.
Mhm.
So, you know, we're doing things that aid students in terms of their end product holistically. But I agree, maybe you know, it shouldn't be that specific.
Yeah.
Maybe we should give them the option of pre-writing however they so
Yeah.
desire, but then we gotta develop a rubric for how we assess
Pre-writing.
the pre-writing.
Well,
Yeah.
what I ran into the same thing as Jessica did, except on the, where students would flip it over on the back, and they would do their pre-writing.
Mhm.
Like, they would do whatever they thought worked best for them, and then, like you said, they go back at the end and they filled it in. So they did their pre-writing, and I'm all for pre-writing because I've seen my general kids
Mhm.
grow since the first essay they wrote to, you know, teaching them how to write, how to pre-write. And like now, they always pre-write. They asked me today, Miss King, can I write an outline for this? I said, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
I about fell over. I was so excited. It's like, absolutely, you can outline. And so, I think I don't know necessarily that do we continue to grade it, put in a box like this, but I
think the
never want to
prac-
discourage it.
Yeah, I think the practice of it is
Yeah.
great.
Right.
And I think teaching them the different ways to do it is great. But I do think, as you've suggested, as Dustin suggested, that providing them with one type of regimented pre-writing on the assessment may be doing them a disservice
Mhm.
and sort of setting them
'Cause
up
I'm happy if
for-
I can just get
Yeah.
students to organize their ideas.
Yeah.
And the
Now-
practice you're observing of students pre-writing on the back and then
Yeah.
flipping it, you know, adding it to
It's
the
just a
box.
waste of
That is,
time.
it's not mimicking or emulating the
No.
assessments at all.
Here's a thought. What if the pre-writing, you know, you teach them different types of pre-writing.
Mhm.
So you leave a lovely blank space and say, pre-write for an essay using one of the established systems that we practiced and that you feel comfortable in, and then that can be what the rubric is. Did they web? Did they box? Did they, you know, whatever? Did they cluster? And that can be like the basis, and then you can base the rubric off of which one they chose.
And then I think what we need to do is devalue the pre-writing
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
terms of numerically and
absolutely.
quantifiably, in terms of our percentage of assessment grade.
'Cause it's
It should not be
40%
40% of the
this.
grade.
Well, and it's not exactly that high because it's kind of skewed because the first three boxes are definitions.
Right.
So that's not even application, which we say our summatives are about.
Yeah, that's just
Right.
recall.
It's
It's
just
just
recall.
recall.
Right.
Yeah. So I think doing that's my bad pitch for it.
Yeah.
Is like to give them something where they actually have to apply.
Now, see, we do on the ELA too, we
Yeah.
do give them, but again, it's only, what would you say, 2%, 5%?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of that, I mean, it's
Should be
very
It should be
low,
small.
but when we do state, give us that brainstorming, the webbing,
Yeah.
I mean, it's right
Small, but
there.
it's-
Yeah, it's just small, but it's there.
I mean, and within that, you could have even more guidelines. You could say, okay,
Yeah.
free writing won't organize your ideas, so you have to take that a step further.
Mhm.
You have to turn your free writing into an outline or circle words or notate or something. But then you have clustering. You could say, well, you can't just go one spoke out from the center. You have to go another level out
Absolutely.
or something like that
Mhm.
that's quantifiable
Right.
that you can actually measure on a page.
Well, I haven't looked closely enough at the air assessment to find out how they're doing it, but what also about the possibility of just having students to do something on a blank sheet of paper, because they used to do that on the OGT.
And that's what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, we could give them that, I mean, that would most closely emulate a testing situation
Right.
too.
Right.
I do want to talk about the student, Darren Sheehan, because there's a newer idea out there that students should be equitably distributed into classes regardless of, you know, subgroups. So basically, minorities, IEP students, socioeconomically disadvantaged students should be equitably distributed into classes, which would basically get rid of tracking, essentially. And that example that you talked about is so incredibly relevant to that discussion. Darren Shoemaker, I've witnessed it in that class. She does not belong in an honors class. I talked to her 8th grade English teacher. She was in a class of 23 students, 18 of whom had IEPs, and she was lower than most of them. Her writing indicates a much lower level functioning than most of our general students.
Yeah.
Being in that class with other students who are very capable has assisted her greatly. And when you look at that 38% growth, yeah, it's a no, and it deserves to be a no. But that 38% would not be 38% if Darren Shoemaker were sitting in period 4-5. It would not be,
No,
period.
not at all.
I know that.
And I've seen it too when I've called on her specifically during a bell ringer where I know she has the answer right. She lights up because she wants to be affirmed in that classroom. She knows that, I think she knows that everybody in there is above her. And I think it does her really a good thing to see her answer a question correctly and have that confidence that she can succeed in this classroom, even though this may not be the most suited for her.
I think that's great, and I think that there's a lot of value in that because we do get those kids get into a track, so to speak. You know, you're a general kid, you'll be a general kid your whole life here, and so they take a general value towards the education as opposed to being in an upper level class, like Josh Nyheiser, who's taking honors simply because he's dating Liv. But it's making him so much stronger than if he was in one of the general courses. And, you know, he's right in there competing with the best of them, you know, in terms of his grade performance. I think it's fantastic.
I don't want this to become a conversation on tracking. I want to focus on the presentation, but
Right.
you know, my experience with that is that students, that's the exception, not the rule. Students rarely go up. It's almost always they drop tracks.
Yes.
Is the direction
Yes.
in which they move.
Like, I've already heard a couple of kids say, oh, I'm taking general next year for senior. I don't want to work this hard in senior year. And I say, I think that's a mistake.
Absolutely.
Jessica, I just
Yeah.
have one question
Yes.
for you on, can you go back to the slide you had up when you said that the formatives aren't indicative of the summative?
You can look at that one.
I mean,
Dr.
this one
Olson.
right here, we
Well,
got
no,
96 and
well, I wanted
87.
to point out a differentiation between two students that I just
Periods
wanted
4
an
5.
answer to.
Okay.
I believe.
This one. Was it this one?
Probably, is that the one where you have two no's?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You had
Well, I have 3
three.
no's.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the one, but you had one student who did very well, you know, on the formatives, even though they're not indicative
Right here,
of the
this one.
summative. And then you had a student who took the formatives who didn't do well at all.
Taj.
And I just wanted to hear
Yeah.
why there was such a great variance between those two.
These two right here, Allen and Smith. Taj, he is no longer here, he withdrew, but when he was here, he was absent frequently, and he was sent to SMR several times for sleeping in class, and so that, he's another one, leaves things blank often. But I got him on a good day for the summative, and he was, I was able to encourage him to, you know, try, at least put something down. And there again, he was interested in the sports. He was interested in, you know, don't cut sports at CHS because that's important, and he felt strongly about that. So I think that the content itself was the reason I may have gotten more out of him on that
Okay,
day.
just curious.
So that would be my 2 cents for that one. But in terms of Unit 3, this is a little bit different. So flip on over to your packets to the page that says Unit 3. It should be after some sample answers. I provided the first 12 questions, which are directly from the park, which are set up so that if you miss question 1, you automatically miss number 2. If you miss question 3, you automatically miss number 4, and so on and so forth. Students did average on this one, I feel like, and they didn't, the scores, I feel like, aren't reflected in this first section, task 1. Where I feel the issue was definitely task 2. So if you want to keep flipping on, it's several pages long. But in this section, they had to read Daedalus and Icarus by Ovid, and To a Friend Who's Come to Triumph, I believe was the other one, by Anne Sexton. And this was extremely a rigorous task for them. The prompt states, use what you have learned from reading Sexton's Daedalus and Icarus by Ovid and To a Friend Whose Work Has Come to Triumph by Anne Sexton to write an essay that provides an analysis, there's that word again, of how Sexton transforms Daedalus and Icarus. Develop your claims of how Sexton transforms Daedalus and Icarus with evidence from both texts. As a starting point, you may want to consider what is emphasized, absent, or different in the two texts, but feel free to develop your own focus for analysis. Now, the biggest thing that I ran into with this prompt itself was that they just completely missed the point. They thought that they needed to tell how one poem changed from one to the other. They thought they needed to talk about what happened in each one, giving a summary of each. They did not analyze the transformation in the characters from one poem to another. And this was a huge problem that I ran into, and which is evident in the sample answers. The first sample answer, if you look at, was from an honor student, provided one paragraph that was completely off the mark, didn't do anything what he was asked, and that's an honor student that we'll talk about here in a minute. But really the biggest issue was they saw the rigor of the two passages, and I think they really shut down and didn't take the time to really focus on the prompt itself, what it's asking, something that they realized was manageable. Now before this, we had read, in preparation for this summative, we had read House on Mongo Street, which is an extremely, I don't want to say extremely easy text, but it's much more manageable than the two poems that they saw in the exam. And they read How to Tell the Great American Indian Novel by Sherman Alexie, as to get them more familiar with poetry and analyzing poetry as a piece of literature. I made them write a literary analysis of those two texts together and how they treated minority groups, and I copied straight from the prompt that was given on the assessment, just with a different text. How did they use the same concept, the same idea of ethnic and racial tensions, and how did they transform that idea through the two poems, or the poem and the novel? So it was a very similar situation, but in terms of the rigor, I didn't use enough of a stepping stone to get them to that high level of rigor. And that's where some of the issues we ran into came from. In 4th and 5th period, which again is my regular class, I have 18 students in this unit, 16 yeses, 2 nos, and that's a 4. But as you can see, all of the colored ones, I gave yeses, but they did not pass the assessment. And I did this because on an assessment like this is modeled directly from the PARCC assessment, I feel like a 40% growth or a 50% growth deserves a yes, because on the PARCC, 25% was the cut score last year. And they would have passed the PARCC with these scores. So that's why I give them a yes. My 2 no's in this group, again, Levi Hurley, my student who is sometimes really good, sometimes bouncing off the walls. And he actually, on this assessment, he copied and pasted from the text itself. He provided none of his original work. He provided no original thoughts. He didn't quote anything. He didn't use quotation marks at all. He just copied and pasted from the poem. And that's a huge issue, and that's why he got a 25%. I believe he pretty much guessed on the multiple choice and the short answer and got lucky a couple times on those to yield this 25, but we went over extensively the following day that this is plagiarism and it is completely unacceptable. And talked on a whole class level with him, but he definitely knew that we were talking about him and the fact that he just copied and pasted straight from the prompt in this situation. So I feel like that has been addressed, but in terms of motivating the student, I have a very hard time getting him to give me anything seriously on paper. He doesn't take much seriously at all in the classroom.
Sometimes those changes in dispositions can be related to the meds that a child might be on, and I was just curious as to whether or not you even knew.
I don't. I know he doesn't have an IEP or anything like that. I don't know.
Right.
I know his home life is not the best. He lives with an aunt.
Well, it's a huge thing sometimes, because the more we know. I had a student once, and I couldn't understand why he was catatonic early in the morning. Found out later that he was on 13 different meds. That would do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this student is one, I've been told that not many of his classmates like him. They find him to be annoying. And in the classroom situation, a lot of times his attitude permeates to the other students, and he takes them down with him. And I feel like the seating move, I actually moved this student right here, Dylan, away from him, because that was an awful combination of them two sitting together. And so it definitely helped Dylan in terms of focus, but Levi, I think he just strives for the attention. And if you are providing him the attention, then he's okay. But in a testing situation when the eyes aren't on him, then he shuts down. So I think that's another issue with this student. In terms of Dylan and this 30, this student is an extremely hard worker when he's focused. I moved his seat and he's sitting on kind of the edge of the room now with 2 other focused students that are really helping him. You know, when he's having problems where he's confused, they definitely turn around and help him out. And that's been an extremely huge help for Dylan. But he's just not one of my best students in terms of performing on tests and even performing in general. Here lately, I've been having the same issue I've had with the other student in terms of not answering the bell ringer. I will stand by him. Dylan, you have to give me something. Take a guess if you don't know it. These aren't graded. Take a guess. And he refuses to even take a guess. And so that's a huge issue that we face with him. He provided me about a paragraph on the summative and just refused to do anything else. I just have a hard time getting anything out of him in a testing situation. And so that's why he's a no as well on there. If we move on, let's go here, to period 1, this is an honors group again. Again, they're a group of better test takers. I've got in this group 17 yeses and 2 nos. My first no is a student who I mentioned the first sample answer I gave you was an honors student, and this is his sample answer that he gave me. He was absent the entire second week of the unit. And I feel like this is partially responsible for this, but at the same time it's not. Because we didn't start the literary analysis unit, the actual talking about the paper and the essay component of it, until the Monday when he came back. So he didn't miss any of the information that directly led to the essay. However, I don't think that he was, he actually missed the week because he was in the hospital, he was ill, and I don't think that he was feeling back up to himself by the time this test rolled around. And I think that is what yielded the 50%. I definitely expected more out of the student, and I am not happy with the score that he provided, but I'm hoping that it will improve as he gets to feeling back to himself since the illness. In terms of this student, Shane, he extremely intelligent student. His biggest problem, which many other students have already also faced, is time management. And in an in-class testing situation, he just did not finish. And when you don't finish a test, that is a huge component as to why he didn't make to 60. He did make it to 59, but again, it's not passing, so we count that as a no. He just an exceptionally bright student, but it just takes him a while. And so we've been really focusing since then on you get a time limit, you have to pace yourself. I am consciously aware that I put the time limit up on the board and continually update that every 5 to 10 minutes to make sure that they know how much time they have left on an assignment, and that when I say time's up, time is up, and they don't get a second chance, so that they are much more focused. He's been improving exceptionally on this, and in timed activities in class to later on we were talking about the essay the following day, he expressed that he knew he had a problem with that and that he was consciously working on that. So those are my 2 no's for this class. In terms of period 3, on unit 3, this we have 27 yeses and 1 no. My no for this is Alec Beavers. He only grew 17% up to a 57. This student had several absences during the unit. He was on a field trip, and I kept on him to get his work in, to get his missing assignments in, and I really just had a hard time getting him to make those things up. With the way the course fell, being half of it first quarter, half of it second quarter, that caused some issues as well in terms of assigning sharp and things like that, because after the quarter was up, he had no motivation to get those assignments in. So that was really where he struggled. On the essay situation, he merely summarized the 2 texts. He didn't provide an analysis. Again, he didn't respond directly to the prompt.
Jessica, will you talk about the average summative scores on Unit 3 and all 3 classes? I see in 3rd period it's 78.5.
Mm-hmm.
What was it in 1st period, and then 4th and 5th?
First period, it was 75.74.
And then in 4-5?
In 4-5, it was a 53. So
53%.
Not even passing in 4-5.
And you said that you were unhappy with those summative scores. Do you want to discuss what you did in terms of the summative in the following day?
The day after, I hadn't graded everybody's assessment that night, but I had graded a large chunk of them. And I noticed the reoccurring trend throughout the entire population, both honors and in the regular classes, that they missed the prompt. They just missed the they didn't talk about transformation in characters from one passage to the next. They summarized, or they, in Darian's case, didn't realize it was an essay that required multiple paragraphs, things like that. So we spent the entire Friday after the exam was on a Thursday, going over this test. I provided a document similar to what I provided you with sample answers. I had the students score them based on the rubric that we went over. We went over the rubric in depth. They summarized each level of the rubric so that they could get a better feel for the steps that they need to take to get to the score that they desire. And they actually scored them, and I talked about why my score might be different than their score. And so that really opened some eyes as far as, I had one student in 4th, 5th period, Bryce Valentine. He wrote an incredibly organized essay. It was awesome. He integrated quotes, used the quote sandwich. He just did a phenomenal job. But he answered a question that the prompt did not ask. And so he failed it, and he was just crushed. We pulled that prompt back up, and they had to read it as part of their bell ringer the next day. And he, I mean, you could see it in his face. He knew it. He knew that he just completely missed it. But throughout the period, he was able to figure out, okay, here's what I should have done, here's what I'll do next time. And so we definitely were able to close learning gaps through that. And I think that that was a really good opportunity to do so. But that's my scores for the Unit 3 assessment. Not as high as I would have liked. I think I could improve that unit by upping the rigor in terms of the content before the exam, but also giving them some more responsibility in terms of what they need to do on their own. I feel like I may have scaffolded them a bit too much in the literary analysis that they wrote prior to the exam. And so they didn't know where to go or what to do without me there helping them on the testing situation. So I definitely think that that could have helped. Any questions about Unit 3 data? Okay. So in terms of my instructional practices that I use, I continue to use bell ringers on a daily basis through the overhead, on the Chromebooks, and through the Google Docs that they've shared with me. I use this time I get once around to ensure classroom management, making sure everybody's on task, really not even looking at their answers the first time around. But then the second time around, that's when I go through, make sure that they're on the right track, closing learning gaps, building relationships with them, that sort of thing during that time. When I cue the bell ringer, I connect it directly to an essential question. I point it out. Usually I have one review question from the previous day's essential question and one preview question about the upcoming content and concepts that we'll be talking about during that day. And I make it an environment that it's okay to guess and that we want them to guess, because it's when they guess that I can see where they're at. If they don't give me anything, I have no idea. I don't know where to start. But when they give me an incorrect guess, I look at that, that's better than nothing any day. And I think that they know that in most cases. They know that they should guess and give me something. So that's where I am at with bell ringers. In terms of the gradual release model, let's skip back for a minute. Review of learning targets. After the bell ringer, I feel like this is my strongest point as a new teacher coming in, the review of learning targets. Every day I go directly to the learning targets. I have noted by a star and 2 check marks or 1 check mark where we've been. The check marks are questions that we've answered, and the star is where we're at today. And the students know that. They know as soon as they walk into class, they see that star, that's what we're focusing on today. And they're really aware of that. I make sure that they know every single day where we've been, where we're headed. I've got their roadmap provided for them on the cupboards so that they can see every day we've added a check mark and we've added a star if we've completed a big idea. And they can use that as they go along. I had a student a couple weeks ago ask me, what does this have to do with language arts? Why are we learning this? And that was a really good opportunity for me to say, okay, here's the essential question, here's how it ties to it, and here's how it ties to the bigger picture of the big idea. And that has happened several times, not just with that student, but with others as well throughout the different units. Also, in terms of coming back to the targets, I incorporated them a couple times on a Prezi when I felt that it flowed best, so that I was forced to come back to those things and discuss them directly when I was delivering the content. But last week we were talking about how to use text features and how to pull out information from a source. And I created an activity where the students read a newspaper article, but it was really just a passage describing the answer to the essential question, which was use text features, summarize, skim the passage, things like that. And during reading that, I had them complete those activities. So the first thing we did, we skimmed the passage. And then when they started reading, skimming is one of the strategies. Then I had them circle all the text features, so the footnotes, the headnotes, subheadings, things like that. They had to pick those out. And then when they finished reading, they had to flip it over and summarize it. And at the end, I asked him, why did we do that? Why did I give you the activity in this way? And one student, well, writing things down improves cognition, it improves your memory. Well, yeah, it does, but why else? Why else? I kept prodding them, and eventually a light bulb came on. And somebody said, we just answered the essential question. We just did that. We didn't just answer it, but we carried it out, and we physically did it. And it was just the coolest thing, and it was kind of like the ripple effect. Once that student got it, the next student got in. By the end of it, everybody understood. And when we went to take that formative a little bit later in the period, they were all like, we just did this. This is easy. And so it was really cool that they were able to make those connections without me telling them. Another thing I do with the learning targets, in a couple periods, I've had students go through them. Okay, which one are we on today? You tell me which one we're on. Because they know it's notated by a star. They know that's where we're at. And I'll have them, well, what did we do yesterday? What did we do in order to learn that concept? And so they're able to tell me about that, and that helps them be engaged in their own learning as well. In terms of the gradual release model, I feel this is where I need the most improvement and the most growth. I feel like I get stuck kind of in the I do because I want to be in control, and then I move directly into a you do, and sometimes the we do gets a little fuzzy. I've been working on that more. Usually I provide notes for them, but in the units that we've been doing that have built off of the argumentative writing unit and the literary analysis unit, they're able to lead the notes. So in a way, I'm up here writing the notes, but they can tell me what comes next. So when we're talking about integrating sources into a research essay, they know that that's a quote sandwich. So they can tell me, okay, here's what you do before the quote, here's what you do after the quote. And I can just add in the new stuff. And they pretty much know the reviewed points of it, and they're able to participate more in that. And then in the you-do, I kind of have used the you-do and the exit slip kind of together in this past unit, the past couple of units really, where they've been writing based, because I just have them share their document with me at the beginning of the unit, and then I continually keep tabs on that, using proximity both to close those learning gaps and to drive the next day's instruction. Where I see gaps existing, I can come back and repeat that information on the bell ringer the next day. So I definitely feel like I need some more work in the gradual release model, just in terms of the proper amount of stepping stones I give them. I don't want to jump too quickly, but at the same time I want to provide them with enough responsibility so that in a testing situation they don't freak out. So that's kind of an area that I'm focusing on myself. I've already kind of hit on exit slips, and in terms of consistency and intent, every day I feel like this is another area that I'm really strong at is pacing. And every day I come in here with a focus, and that my focus is the essential question. And every single day for I bet the past 3 weeks, I have checked off an essential question in here. And we are on pace as far as Unit 3. We ended Unit 4 today, excuse me. And if we had enough time throughout the rest of the semester, which is difficult with Thanksgiving coming up and the testing and whatnot, we would be on pace to finish on time. And I think that's because intentionally, every single lesson that I have, I am so focused on the essential question. Because unlike teachers who have maybe more experience, they have a project that they're really passionate about. I'm not so passionate about a research paper. I'm not so passionate about the project as a whole. I need them to answer this question. I don't really care if they can do the big project, as long as they get this little part of it. And I think that that's really what's helped me in terms of pacing and even lesson planning. This is my goal, and I want to attack that every single period. And I'm going to let nothing stand in my way to get them to that goal. Even if that's a project, maybe we were talking about the movie posters. Yeah, they would help in terms of analyzing literature, but they're kind of a distraction, and they're going to keep us from getting to where we need to be. So every day I try to be intentional about planning a lesson that is directly related to the essential question. And in terms of consistency, every single day we have the same procedures, the routines. The students know them. They know that the bell ringer is coming. Actually, today I had the bell ringer up on the computer screen, but I forgot to turn the projector on. And they were like, where's it at? What's going on? And so, I mean, they know consistently every single day the process that we go through. And Department of Course Goals, bell ringers, I use them same way I have been. Today we did sort of a different one with the technology. They were allowed to go out and use Purdue OWL website and other citation websites in order to create citations based on information I provided them on the screen. So that was a really cool thing. They were able to use some resources that I've mentioned to them but haven't forcibly told them, hey, use this resource. So today during the bell ringer, they got the opportunity to do that. And then using proximity during the bell ringer and exit slips really helps close those learning gaps, help get us up to that 75%. So So that's a lot of information.
Mr.
Any
Weaver,
questions?
Yes.
having the fantastic Jessica around, how are you going to feel when she's not here?
I don't know. You know, at the beginning, I hated being out of the room because I'm very much like Jeff, and then I'm a control freak, and I didn't want to give it up. And honestly, therapeutically for me at the beginning, it was better to be out of the room because when I was in here, Jessica could attest to this, I had a hard time staying out of the class. She would ask a question, and I would raise my hand because I love teaching and I love learning and I'm passionate about it. It's going to be difficult to transition back. You know, she's made me a better teacher in a lot of ways. The way she uses proximity, her focus throughout the period. I know Jeff above the roadmap way that she does everything. You know, I've gained so many ideas from her, and it's taken me back to my first years as a teacher where I was so insanely creative. And I've seen innovative ways of going about things. You know, when she talked about literary devices, she created a Google slide presentation. She didn't talk about this today, but it was incredible. Created a slides presentation, gave each student their own vignette within House on Mango Street, and a brand new one that they hadn't read, so it's new content. And each student had their own slides. So they read the vignette, they summarized it, and they identified 3 specific literary devices within that particular vignette. And you know, it took a lot of faith in her to do that because students could edit anybody's slide. But you know, what we saw at the end of that was one of the most well-documented study guides I have ever seen for literary devices. It was absolutely incredible.
And it was a really cool way to differentiate too, because I was able to pick who got what vignettes, and I knew that the bigger ones would be easy because there's more to work with. And there were a couple of vignettes that were maybe only a paragraph or too long, and so I gave those to the more advanced students. And the first thing out of their mouth, "There's nothing in here." Yes, there is. And then I would open it and I would read off everything that I saw. I wouldn't tell them where it was, but I'd say, "There's characterization, there's imagery, there's irony, there's all these things," and they'd be like, "How did you find that?" I'm like, "Well, you're going to right now." So it gave them kind of an opportunity to really push themselves in a way, well, if I found it, you can too. So it was really cool.
Yeah.
I have a degree, that's how I
Exactly.
They don't like that answer.
Does anybody have questions for Jessica before I hammer her?
You're gonna
I'm
hammer
gonna
her?
Can I
hammer
mention
her.
one more thing?
Get
though?
out of here.
You got like a minute.
Okay, I got a minute.
What's up?
Flip to the back of your packets. I provided the rubric that I use, and I just want to mention this. I think it would be a great thing, and you can take this for what it's worth. I'm a student teacher. I have no clout. But I think it would be really great if,
Oh, you've got clout.
if the English department, if across the course, if not across the entire department, would use a consistent rubric. I think, not that this one's the greatest one out there, but I think it's definitely important when looking at how I grade should be the same as how you grade. Because when my students get to your class and they're expected different things out of them and they're graded differently, that's going to cause an issue. And I feel like in terms of consistency among the students, it would be a great thing to create a similar rubric that we all use, whether it's an argumentative essay, a literary analysis, a research paper, or something completely different. If it's an essay, we should all be using the same rubric.
Now, what are you talking? Are you talking about the holistic rubric for
Yes,
the
that's the one I
OGT
use.
on writing? The
Yeah.
6543.
Yeah, that's the one I use, just because that's the one that he used.
Uh-huh.
That's the one I use.
I just think it's helpful. I
Whether
think-
it's the AP, whether it's the ACT, whether it's the OGT, or whatever.
It doesn't
I
matter.
agree. A common rubric is needed for our students. You know, we talk all the time, they talk about the district level, the need for cold assessments. We don't need cold assessments. We need to be involved in the creation of assessments because we have a stake in our students' success. Our evaluations, our livelihood are dependent on it. We don't need cold assessments. We need cold graders. And the way you get cold graders is to use a universal rubric and have inter-grader reliability.
And
that's
have
what
work
that's what we
samples
need.
where you can say, okay, I graded this way, why do you disagree? And I don't know when the time is for that because we obviously don't have time at these weekly meetings, but I think it would be definitely helpful to say, I grade this one way, you grade it another way, why do we have this issue if we're using the same rubric? So,
You ready for this?
yeah, I'm ready.
You have 30 seconds to answer each question.
Crap.
Because
Okay,
I have
go.
announcements to give.
Go.
Okay, 3 questions. 1, And you're not allowed to use an instructional practice to answer any of these.
Oh boy, okay.
Okay? What has been your biggest area of growth as a teacher in your time here?
I would say rapport with students. Getting to know them and being able to differentiate them based on their interest. And really,
How do you do it?
oh my gosh, okay. So you're throwing me under the bus here. But anyways, first period, for instance, Jayla Brown, I know that she's in 4-H. I know that she takes market sheep because she missed a couple days of school to go to her fair in Fayette County. I know that. And I was in 4-H. I took lambs. So we have a connecting point. When we were doing our research essay, she's looking at being a vet. And she was looking at some different things on veterinary medicine at Ohio State, and she came across this thing where a person was speaking, and I happened to know about that person, and we had a conversation about that, and immediately that sparked an interest in her, because the doctor that we were looking at is involved in animals and students with disabilities. And the student, Jayla, is involved with animals, and her mom teaches students with disabilities. And immediately that was something that we could connect on and we had an in-depth conversation with. And I try to do something like that every single day. It might not be that stellar of an example, but every single day, I make meaningful relationships with my students.
Okay, second question. Besides the need to do a better job with what we do, and outside of the instructional practices, what is your biggest area for growth? Area in which you need to grow as an educator?
I would say providing variety, more variety. I feel like I get stuck with the old, I'm just going to write notes up here on the board and you're going to copy them down and I'm going to tell you what you need to know and that's how it's going to be. I think that I really need to mix things up. I know that I've used a bunch of different things, but I've kind of gotten a rut with each thing that I've used. I've used PowerPoint for a week. I use YouTube videos and the students come in, we are not watching another YouTube video, are we? And so I think mixing it up in terms of every single day doing something different with them would keep them engaged and just promote engagement more.
All right, ready?
I'm ready.
I want you to evaluate our instructional practices, and I want you to tell me, do you feel like they've benefited you or they've restricted or limited you? And I want you to be entirely honest.
Now, hold on for a second. Are you talking about
Bell ringers,
the
learning targets.
essential questions?
Yes. Go.
Okay.
I would say, I honestly don't know if you follow them every single day like you're supposed to. I don't know how you can not be successful. And that's the honest truth. In terms of what I've learned in college, it aligns perfectly with everything that I've been taught in terms of activating prior knowledge, building on concepts you've already learned, reaching out to the students, closing those learning gaps, differentiation, all those things you can do within the instructional practices. And in terms of being restricted, you're not restricted, I feel like. I would be doing a lot of these things anyway. I would be doing a bell ringer anyway because it's been proven to work. And I feel like I have enough freedom within the gradual release model, within the time limits. I was able to pick what novel I chose. The novel that I chose to teach wasn't one that anybody here had ever done. And I was able to do that. I wasn't restricted in that way at all. And I feel like in terms of the content, we can do whatever we see fit, and I don't feel restricted at all.
You did a great job. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's over.
It's over.
A couple quick announcements before this bell rings here. First of all, has everyone logged into Air, Tide, whatever on OBE?
I have not.
I just got my email today
Okay.
because I
I
figured
just got in today.
out why I didn't get it was my old email
Uh-huh.
went away, and I suddenly realized that must be the issue, and email
There you go.
was
That
swindled.
was-
So I now have the thing,
Got
but I
it.
haven't had time to
Okay.
pursue it yet.
Have you all had the opportunity to look at the Air administration document? We are going to be administering the first test and the English test, and then we get 2 days off on the 14th and 15th.
Not
Well,
off, but from Proctor.
2 days.
Proctor free.
days. Yes, exactly. Next, most importantly, our meeting next Friday will not be next Friday. There's a DLT meeting next Friday afternoon. Also Thursday afternoon, moving a day back, Miami Trace and Circleville are going to be here. So our next meeting is going to be next Wednesday. We are not going to have a presenter next Wednesday. We have to get through a practice profile for our TBT as part of our grant next week, and that'll give us an opportunity to talk about AIR and go over the resources that we have, especially at freshman and sophomore level. So we'll go next Wednesday, and then that means our next presenter will not be until December 4th, with Dr. Lawson, and then Chris, you'll be December 11th. And that will get us done before exam week. So 4th, Dr. Lawson, 11th, Chris, and next week's our last meeting. I know it's hard to believe, in November.
Yeah.
Okay, our next meeting will be December 4th. We aren't going to have a meeting the week of Thanksgiving.
Well, and we also have that after-school meeting next Thursday to go over all the year stuff.
Right.
Next Thursday?
So next
Thursday after school.
next Wednesday probably won't last the entire time. Got to knock out the profile that we're required to do as part of the grant, and then talk about any issues that we're having, and then we can get out of here.
Okay.
Okay? Yes, ma'am. Wednesday?
Yeah, next.
We
at
could
1
choose
o'clock.
that if you want. You want to do
I mean, I'm just.
Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday next week. You pick it. I don't care.
Can we do
whatsoever.
Monday?
What's
I
that?
won't be here Tuesday.
I can tell them I'm gonna be late. I mean.
Do you want to do
10 or
Monday?
15.
What do you mean? Monday's
You
good.
know.
We
Let's
just
do
get it
Monday.
finished.
Well,
What
we
do you need?
can do Monday, but Monday is also the day that SLRs are due.
We're doing the quotes today.
Let's just shoot for Monday.
Monday.
And if Monday is absolutely not going to work, let me know, and we'll move it to Wednesday. Okay. And if need be, I guess I could try to make Thursday work, although I'm presenting.
You know they're walking in and they move
So I
it.
don't know if I could do that.
Just,
Yes.
since it hasn't been determined for certain yet,
Mhm.
what our schedules will be on the 4th and the 11th, just FYI. We may have abbreviated presentations if
That's
that
the other
third
thing.
option doesn't
Yeah.
work,
That's the other thing.
just,
Do we have a preference in terms of the option one? Two of the three leave us with 7th period in its entirety.
yeah, but
And I think it's our department.
that second one.
A second one gives us 30-some minutes, right? And I don't like it anyway.
Yeah.
I
think
really
choice
like
3.
choice 3.
I
You still get the blocks.
Just different people on
yes.
different days. It's
And
not as
In
crazy.
terms of test preparation too, you need that longer period of time with it.
Yes,
I really like the third one.
since we're
Third or the
abbreviating our
original.
time to test them for the rest of our units and get ready for finals.
But I have a fear though. My fear is that we're one of the few departments with 7th prep. So
Well,
we're gonna,
Yeah,
it's
we're gonna
very
be in
possible we're gonna
but
be.
even so, what's best for
overwhelmed.
our students has nothing to do with prep time. And it would still be scheduled for you.
I think so too.
But, you
So
know.
vote for 3.
That's what I know.
All right,
But
sounds good.
It'll probably be not 3, just because
Just because